Dr. Yumkella, this week's executive program constitutes the official launch of what you call the UNIDO Institute for Capacity Development. This institute has been one of your own personal initiatives for UNIDO. What do you want it to achieve, and why do you think this institute is really significant?
First of all, I would like to bring together some of the best thought leaders from around the world to provide knowledge and training for policymakers and experts around the world on emerging global issues in general. Second, I want to use this institute as a way of capacity building. We emphasize capacity building in various forms here. First of all, to create the awareness about some of the major global issues, give an indication of best practices around the world, particularly in the policy space. Third, explore ways in which there can be broader cooperation around from different regions to arrive at solutions. And finally, to give an opportunity to UNIDO experts who see these issues on a daily basis as they do programs in developing countries and emerging economies, to be able to disseminate some of what they observe on the ground as solutions, but also to use this as a way of teaching people how other countries have dealt with these problems. So it gives an opportunity for our own in-house experts to disseminate knowledge as well. Well, the bigger dream, of course, is always to integrate what we call in UN parlance the global forum function of UNIDO, which is the normative function, setting global standards, for example, in environmental pollution issues or climate change for that matter. Bringing that close to what we do practically in countries, in communities on the ground. So, one feeding on the other, taking knowledge, global knowledge systems to teach people, but at the same time the reverse. Issues we observe on the ground as we implement program coming back in as best practices about how solutions can really be taken, for example, from a global public policy level to a factory floor. Because after all, we're an industry agency. We want to do that bridging, that connection.
UNIDO itself has chosen green growth and related strategies and negotiations as the main theme for this course. I think this is a very clear message and a clear statement. But why green growth? There is a lot of concern out there that this is really an agenda of the northern countries, of the rich countries. Is green growth important also for least developed countries?
Well, I am fully convinced, based on my own travels around the world, my own participation in major global debates today, that green growth is the issue for the 21st century. In the following sense, we know for sure that we're going to experience major population growths. For example, in less than 10 days, there will be 7 billion people on this planet. I know from the World Economic Forum surveys, because I'm part of the Global Agenda Council for the World Economic Forum on climate change, I know from those surveys, even the ones as late as December 2010, that there is a major concern about resource scarcity. So the days of cheap energy, cheap food, cheap oil are all gone. We also know that there's a lot of water stress. And thirdly, we recognize that that the whole issue of job creation and structural change in poor countries has to occur within this broader context of climate change, resource scarcity, demographic changes, and yet they have to deal with poverty and growth. That is a context where you cannot say, I grow and I'll think about pollution later. I grow, I think about climate change later. No, climate change is a major risk multiplier for everybody. But also we see that in this context, there's a lot of innovation taking place, a lot of work being done from Brazil to China and India, and also in the EU and the United States, that people are already addressing these issues. They're trying to introduce innovation in public policy, innovation in financing, innovative technologies to in fact reduce the constraints of what some scientists are calling the planetary boundaries. These are real issues, we can't run away from them, and all these issues of pollution and carbon and greenhouse gases are all transboundary. The water stress issues are transboundary. The depletion of ecosystems are transboundary. So developing countries are going to see that their growth is within this context. I mean, one of the numbers we're looking at last week with the International Energy Agency in their New World Energy Outlook is that in fact developing countries have to push growth, development and structural change at the time when they will experience an average price of oil at $100 a barrel. When other economies were doing their own transformation and structural change, the average price of oil at that time was $25 a barrel. So just look at the major constraint, in fact, on the energy front, but at the same time, the opportunity that renewables and new energy systems can bring to reduce that constraint on developing countries.
Listening to you and to your personal commitment and dedication to this theme, it is not surprising that you have become one of the key global figures related to this whole challenge of energy for development. The Secretary General of the United Nations is relying a lot on your advice and your leadership. Can you tell us a bit about some of the initiatives that are underway and unfolding right now?
Well, thanks to my UNIDO experience, I know you cannot have a competitive industry without a cheap source of energy. You cannot have real industrial transformation and growth without a reliable source of energy. I have seen the experiences in Africa, in Nigeria and other places. And hence, we decided in UNIDO 4 or 5 years ago that we will deal with energy issues, industrial energy efficiency issues. We will deal with the possibility of contributing to the spread of renewable energy around the world. Based on that work, I was asked by the Secretary General to chair UN Energy 4 years ago. We have now focused 4 years on mobilizing global attention to this, recognizing that when the Millennium Development Goals were adopted, there was no mention of energy. Well, we know today, based on the work we've done over 4 years with UNDP, UNEP, FAO and others, none of those Millennium Development Goals will be achieved, particularly in Africa, without access to energy. In that vein, we have worked very hard with the Secretary General's leadership and support to launch a report last year. I chaired his Energy and Climate Advisory Group with some CEOs of companies and some UN agency heads, where we made the case that universal energy access is possible by 2030. We also made the case that at the same time as we try to achieve universal energy access for the poor, that at the same time we promote an improvement in energy efficiency, or put it another way, a reduction in energy intensity. So here we are saying we provide energy for development, growth and achieving MDGs, but at the same time we change the way we use energy globally, in developing countries, but also in OECD countries and emerging economies. This year in the Vienna Energy Forum, we added a third goal, to double the share of renewables in the global energy mix. In fact, we've put a number. We say increase the share of renewables to 30% in the global energy mix. The Secretary General has decided then that for his second term, for the next 5 years, he'll put his full weight behind sustainable development and this energy agenda. And so 3 weeks ago at the General Assembly, he announced a new initiative called Sustainable Energy for All. This is building on a resolution we got through the General Assembly last December to declare 2012 the year of sustainable energy for all. So that gives political cover. The Secretary General now launched this new initiative. He's asked myself and the CEO, the Chairman of the Board of Bank of America, Chad Holliday, to lead his new initiative. And we will be chairing a group, co-chairing a group of almost 35 people, 20 of them CEOs of major corporations around the world, some ministers, some foundations to guide this new initiative. And our hope is in the next 5 months, we will develop an action agenda to achieve the 3 goals: universal access to energy 2030, improvement in energy efficiency by 40% by 2030, and increasing the share of renewables in the global energy mix by 2030. Question is, what actions need to be taken at the policy level? What actions need to be taken in developing innovative financing models? Third, what technologies are available that are quickly deployable and shared? And fourth, which is very ambitious, how do we accelerate the energy revolution? You might ask, what the heck is the energy revolution? Well, Nicola Stern says you need a new energy revolution and an industrial revolution to keep the world below 450 parts per million carbon pollution. To keep the world at 2 degrees or below, you need that revolution, according to Nick Stern. At the same time, Jeremy Rifkin last month launched his new book, The Third Industrial Revolution. He also says you need this new energy revolution based on what he calls the democratization of energy through distributive energy sources. You can imagine my happiness to see these 2 key thought leaders around the world calling for this, but it is because they cast it within an industrial revolution, well documented, well researched, to show that in fact all the epochs of industrial revolution and growth that we have seen in the world have been linked with energy, major changes and transformation in energy production and use, combined with information systems, spreading information, knowledge around the world, and hence the UNIDO Institute. And I like what Mr. Lutkenos and his team have done. They've really mixed it well. I mean, I could not have been that creative putting some people who are handling these negotiations at the global level with practitioners and policymakers and thinkers. What a mix. Because we noticed in the UN, I'm sure you're going to push me on that later on in this interview, that the negotiators are doing one thing politically, but sometimes they don't see the reality of what is happening on the ground in countries, in ministries of industry, finance, energy and technology institutions that are already taking action. We don't want the politics to be separated from the reality of job creation and real climate change and flooding taking place in a number of areas. And in fact, in Africa, climate changing so fast that we do see these major cycles of farming taking place now. So what a nice mix.
Well, thank you very much for pushing me. In fact, I was going to ask you a somewhat more provocative question. When you talk about all of this, is this just a diplomatic affair? Is this the world of negotiations, conferences, decisions, resolutions? Or are you also involving the private sector? Where is the money going to come from? Where are the resources going to come from to make this big industrial and energy transformation happen? And how are you involving these stakeholders?
Well, in fact, we are doing a complementary service to the negotiations globally. We recognize those negotiations are slow and will be slow because of various national political interests. Our strategy is to say, fine, we will support the negotiations by giving evidence and information about opportunities and evidence of real change and real best practices around the world. But at the same time, we are going to begin to build those partnerships that will make real change happen. We are going to build those partnerships that will bring finance on the table. So, for example, our initiative, which we're leading for the Secretary General, we will have 4 groups already working. The first task force, which will be led by Commissioner Peebles of the Commissioner for Development of the European Union and Ellen Clark and possibly the CEO of OPEC Fund, some other people, they will be looking at real numbers. How do we achieve universal access by 2030? First of all, how do we do the planning in the countries to develop an energy vision for a country for 10, 20 years? And then within that plan, how do we change the energy mix and how do we finance it? We already have 4 of those plans running now in Kenya, in Rwanda, in Morocco, and now in South Africa. We will be launching the South African initiative called SERI, the South African Renewable Energy Initiative. These are clear templates. You look at it, you see national targets, actions they plan to take, how much money the government will bring on the table, how much the multilateral and bilateral agencies will bring, and what needs to be leveraged. More importantly, how do you use ODA to de-risk commercial investments? Because we are not talking about experimentation anymore. You know, people put one solar panel in a roof in a village and we clap our hands that we've given them renewables. No. We call it that you're only shining light on poverty. We want energy in communities that also transforms their productivity, production systems, that reduces the burden on women. That's one group. The second group is well chosen, and the task force is well structured to look at this energy revolution. Here we're looking at future R&D and also scaling up the deployment of existing technologies. For example, we're looking at carbon capture and storage. We know there are 25 experiments. They're still experiments. What do we need to do to decarbonize energy systems? Because we know from all the projections we will still be fossil-based for the foreseeable future. However, we can decarbonize those systems. So we're looking at these existing technologies. We're looking at smart grids. For Rifkin's idea of distributive and democratization of energy to take place, you need grid systems that will balance base loads. You need grid systems that will take energy from the roofs of ordinary citizens and feed it into the system. So we're looking at these breakthrough energy technologies that will help us integrate energy systems. So that group will be led by CEOs of major companies, for example. It will, one of the leaders there will be the CEO of Vestas. In fact, our first meeting for that task force is going to take place in their R&D center. But remember, we're going to mix it up. We also will put in that group the CEO of the National Development Bank of Brazil, the CEO of the China Development Bank, because sovereign funds are taking bets now, 5-10 years, which some of our traditional financing systems cannot do. The last two task forces will be looking at partnership models. Here again, we have a very formidable group, the Global Compact. We'll be leading that with notable people like Sir Mark. Many people in the UK, I know there's no Sir Mark's work in industry. And finally, the last group, we're not naive. You need communications. Part of the changes we need in use of energy requires behavioral change. So we need good communication, but more importantly, recognizing the politics of energy. We know we need to communicate. So we will launch a major campaign globally. Secretary General will launch that campaign already January 16 in Abu Dhabi, already set up. The World Economic Forum has given us a public forum already in the next Davos, same title, Sustainable Energy for All, and so on and so forth. We're launching a global campaign, then we will end up in Rio. We will go to COP17 first in December, where we've already choreographed a high-level session. We'll go to Rio. After that, hopefully we get a global platform and commitment to the action agenda, which the Secretary General will launch with global leaders. And then we deal with implementation. And that is where I will close. It means that after Rio, we will have a list of countries where we can say, if we take action in the next decade, we reduce energy poverty by 50% globally. We know the numbers already. If you tackle India with 400 million people not connected to electricity, Nigeria with 100 million, Bangladesh with another crop, Indonesia, with 5 countries, you already target half the energy poor. You add to that another 10 or 15 LDCs, I tell you, we know we can reach it. That's what Commissioner Peebles and the others will be focusing on. We finish Rio, we begin implementation immediately. Energy plans, energy assessment. But here again, I come to the Institute. It's not energy for the sake of energy. It is energy to propel the growth these economies need and transformation to reduce poverty and, in fact, create jobs for their youth. We don't want the Arab Spring to be, in fact, the African nightmare when we look at the demographics. But we also know, I learned this recently from a marketing group, we know even in Europe and in America you have TGIF. Yes, it's not Thank God It's Friday. It is the Twitter, Google, Internet, Facebook generation. We learned this in a discussion on global governance. This is from a lady who was listening to us for a whole day and a half. You know, me and my colleagues talking all these wonderful discussions on global governance and global architecture. This is a lady whose company's net worth is $500 million. She has her own company marketing luxury products. She says, I've listened to all of you. You've not talked about TGIF. We marketers look at TGIF as a new source of marketing. He said, but guess what? We recognize from UK to other places, this is a new youth group that constitute a major political and economic force. They caused the Arab Revolution. They caused riots in England. And guess what? She said this 2 months ago. We know now they've also started Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Rome, Occupy London stock market. You can't ignore this force anymore. We want to mobilize that force into this new energy revolution. We need the jobs for them, but they can also be part of the change. So again, the Institute, these are the kinds of things this Institute will be looking for at. How do you mobilize these kids to give them hope and give them jobs? But maybe they can give you the ideas, because some of us are too old now to think about their own future. Their aspirations are different from us. We had it all, the age of plenty. It's different now.
Let me just bring, and this leads me to my final question, these exciting big picture reflections of yours back to the executive course that we are going to kick off now. This course is all about global negotiations, and very often this is about bridging conflicting interests. We are looking at climate change negotiations. COP17, Durban, is pretty much around the corner. We are looking at the preparatory process for Rio+20. What is going to be very high on the agenda there is issues of fairness. There is talk about carbon justice, there is talk about climate justice. Could you finally share some reflections on these issues with us?
Well, you need social justice around the world. You also need climate justice around the world, and you need inclusive growth. We know, particularly from UNIDO's work and others, that one of the challenges is global inequality within countries and also across regions. One of the papers, in fact, done by Mr. Lutkenhorst himself, we know that there will be more poor people in some middle-income countries than even the poorest of the poor. In China, India, and so on, Latin America, Brazil, based on inequality. More for the rich, less for the others who are lower down in the totem pole. So this whole issue about equity, fairness, will be relevant within countries, will be relevant across borders. There's another dimension of that. We see some regions talking about energy independence. You know, talking about energy independence and also talking about diversification of sources. Well, I know as I speak to you that the diversification strategy includes sourcing a lot of energy and raw materials from Africa. You know, some countries have already developed the models to source 20 or 25% of their energy resources from the Gulf of Guinea, where you have some of the most energy poor. In the Niger Delta, for example. Well, wait a minute here. If we're going to talk about a safer world, a more inclusive growth, these people also deserve access to energy. If we're talking about climate change and people say, let's save the forests, we want to save the forests. But also people need to eat, they need to feed, they need to build houses still. Here again, we don't want a two-class society. One society is made zookeepers to save the forests, but they maintain their consumption levels low, and others are driving SUVs and Mercedes and Peugeot, Citroën, whatever you call it. We want these people also lifted, but hopefully we teach them that they can grow and not do it the old way we did it for 150 years. Polluting as they go along, assuming ecosystems will fix everything. Our hope in this institute is to grow in a sustainable manner. In China, they say in a harmonious way, balancing environment, growth, and people's needs. I see that Ambassador Yumkella will be with you. He gave me the privilege just a week ago to address his incoming class of people in the Diplomatic Academy. And he told me, Kandeh, don't talk to the faculty, talk to the students, young generation, bright-eyed kids. And I said to them, you know, we hope you learn in this Diplomatic Academy how to negotiate, how to talk across cultures and across people, because we're all in this one planet. And today you cannot tell others to reduce their pollution if you continue your own lifestyles elsewhere. You cannot tell people to use energy differently if in fact they don't have energy to begin with. You cannot suddenly say to people, democratize, liberalize your economies, but don't consume the way we do. Remember, we taught the world that if you democratize, if you have plural societies and plural economies, the reward is, they used to call it in the Thatcher period, the ownership society. You have a house, a good family, and maybe you'll have a car too. Well, don't say to people now, we want you to do all of those stuff, but don't consume as much meat as we did. Don't drive the Mercedes, you just stick to the nano car. It's not going to happen. We need a different dialogue, and so I told Ambassador Winkler's students, if you have Chinese and Africans in this room, you better learn how you dialogue, how you negotiate. Because you can't come to the Africans and take their iron ore and gold and diamonds and everything and say, oh guys, okay, it was all part of trade, but you stay poor. No, the dialogue has to be different. Finally, I like what Bob Zelek says. The new dialogue has to be, how do we help you Africans and poor people become new markets? Raise their growth, because why? We need more growth centers. The evidence now, the past 2 years is, thanks to other growth poles around the world, maybe we will be pulled out of the global recession we see and global debt crisis. Africa and others could be your next frontier for growth. If those population numbers are true and the purchasing power is there, we have a better balanced economy around the world. You have other growth poles, industry can sell from OECD countries because people have purchasing power. That purchasing power is going to depend on industrialization and transformation. And in this course, we know the Washington Consensus discouraged people talking about industry and industrial policy. Well, I have something to tell you. In the Green Growth Forum that I have been participating last week in Denmark and elsewhere, you can't divorce green growth from industrial strategies. I'm not talking about central planning. I'm talking about market-based approaches where the public policy gives clear signal for the creation of new innovation, new markets, because why? They help to de-risk. They incentivize growth, innovation, and also have public policy to support startups. They have public policy to give confidence to markets that, yes, like in the EU, that the 2020 targets are real for 20 years. Then the private sector make a bet. That is the linkage, again, this course is going to provide future renditions of this course. The link within public policy, industrial strategies, and green growth. Very crucial. And to come back to Mr. Lutkinos' first question, why green growth? That's the 21st century. That's the reality. And it's about linking public policy and innovation and also incentivizing and bringing in the private sector. They have the cash, not governments.
Director General Yumkella, I thank you very much for this interview and for having given us this truly inspiring and exciting platform for the course, which is going to kick off tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the time, and I'm sorry I couldn't be with you for various reasons, but hey, Mr. Lutkinos will tell you, we've been cooking this since I joined. We decided, we've been trying various ways of launching this course. I feel it was even better we waited. If we had done it 3 years ago as I had hoped, I would have guided this in the wrong direction. I'm very happy that we're putting the first course on green growth. That's the reality today we face. Thank you very much.